Oh my guys, and welcome back to the airwaves. You've tuned in again to the Life to the Full podcast, the podcast that educates and inspires you to make the most of your time here on Earth. I've been considering a lot recently the importance of creating more than I consume. I did a whole mini episode of this idea of constantly consuming, leading to an inability to think, unhelpful and unhealthy comparisons with others, and ultimately a dissatisfaction with life. Creating, on the other hand, leads to clarity of thought, joy, and a sense of satisfaction. And this is all very well in theory, but how can that work out in practical terms? I want to take a few minutes today to unpack making time for creativity, in hope that I can inspire you to create more than you consume. There are three things that hold us back from creating and keep us trapped in the miserable infinite scroll of consuming. Number 1, lack of ideas. Number 2, lack of time. And number 3, lack of emotional energy. Let's take them one by one. Lack of ideas. I'm not creative. I don't know what to do to be creative. I just don't have any ideas. I just find myself scrolling endlessly. If you haven't got any way of being creative because you can't think of anything, it's no wonder that you find yourself scrolling endlessly. Now, this really should be the easiest one to fix. If you don't know what you can do to be creative, give yourself a challenge of coming up with 30 ideas of what you could do. If I'm ever stuck on a problem, I try to force myself to come up with 30 ways of solving the problem. I've said it before, and the research shows it to be the case. The more ideas you can come up with, the better your chances of coming up with a good one or something that works. If you can only think of one idea, it is not likely to be the optimum solution. We often gravitate towards the most familiar ideas first, which may not get us that far down the road. If you can think of 30, you can almost always come up with something to move the needle in the right direction. It's just worth saying here as well that the 30 ideas don't all have to be good or practical ideas. In fact, the more crazy you can make some of them, the more likely you are to find some inspiration to get the right plan. And of course, the most obvious thing to say at this point is, just get started with something. It could be anything which means you're producing output. It doesn't have to be something which you commit to forever. Just make the stakes really low and iterate from there. Number 2, lack of time. This is a big one. Life is busy. Maybe it's just the people that I interact with, but almost everybody, when you ask them how life is going, will say some version of busy. It's worn as a badge of honor. It makes us feel important. But if we are too busy to spend time creating, at least a little bit of the time, we're too busy. Having freedom of time is one of the greatest freedoms I know of. Time to do the things we want to do. Time to spend with the loved ones in our lives. Time to be creative and to create. If we have that freedom and autonomy over our time, it leads to greater levels of satisfaction in life and a sense of being in control. Most of us have some level of responsibility in life. Work, wives, husbands, children, being captain of the book club, whatever. If you're too busy to spend some time creating, it's time to make some changes. Making changes to increase how much time freedom you have is a game changer, or a life changer, if you will. Again, here's the 30 ways challenge. Come up with 30 ways of freeing up your time to be creative. Maybe go part-time at work. Maybe find a friend who will take the children for an afternoon in return for you doing the same. Turn off the TV, go for a walk. There's 4 for starters. And go wild. Number 3, lack of emotional energy. Being creative requires a level of energy, motivation, inspiration, and commitment which sometimes just isn't there. There are some obvious things to address to try and make this process of creativity easier. Things like, have I had enough sleep? Have I been physically active? Have I filled my body with the right nutrition? Have I filled my mind with the right thoughts? If the answer to any of these questions is no, then that's the first thing to address. It's much easier to feel energized to create when you're well rested, when you eat wholesome, nutritious foods, when you've given your body that physical working it needs, when you've had enough light, when you've had enough time in nature. But sometimes there are times where that's not enough. I experienced this firsthand in the summer of 2021, during the time the Olympics were on. My wife was doing a 15-day training course in London, which involved leaving the house around 6:30 a.m. and not getting back until 7:30 p.m, having some dinner, then doing work until 9 p.m, then going to bed and starting again the next day. And this continued for 15 days straight. So I had the joy of entertaining, caring for a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old in a new city. And I'm going to be honest, I take my hats off to all the single parents out there. We did have a great time. We went to museums, we went to parks, went to see friends, travelled on the tube, and all that good stuff. But it was tough in some ways. By the end of the day, all I could do was just switch off and watch Today at the Olympics. I wanted to create. I wanted to make videos for you. I wanted to write scripts, edit. But all I could manage after 14 hours of looking after 2 children, doing all of the feeding, the looking after, the washing, the getting to bed, all I was able to do was switch my mind off and consume. There are no quick answers that I know of if you find yourself in that situation of being so taken up with day-to-day living, making sure nobody's starving, making sure that everybody's clean. It might be that you've worked an 80-hour week and you feel you deserve to spend time consuming. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with chilling out with a film at the end of the week, but there's something of a disconnect with yourself if you've spent so much time working that you can't ever face creating. I want you to try and imagine, how can I change my situation so that I'm left with energy at the end of the day? How can I start engineering my life to create space for creating? What changes do I need to make so that I have the time and the energy to create? In many ways, one of the reasons we lack emotional energy is because we've used it all up in our day-to-day lives because of a lack of time. So I guess I'd refer you back to point number 2. I consider myself so blessed to be in a situation where I can create. It's not lost on me the auspicious nature of my life in some ways is a function of the place I was born and the family I was born into. I have the time and the energy to be able to create. But it's also a function of intentional living. I've designed my life and continue to design my life and iterate and change in a way that facilitates creativity. I'm taking steps to design a life which I enjoy. I love living, even with the challenges that this lifestyle presents. You can also be the architect and the designer of your life. You can start to make changes that can facilitate more time freedom and more energy. The question is, how will you do it? Thank you so much for joining me again on the Life to the Full podcast. Please, if you've enjoyed the show so far, send your favourite episode to a friend. I can recommend episode number 16, where I interviewed Joshua from The Art of Money Saving, or my most popular episode, number 11, where I ask the question, communication, why does it have to be so hard? So until next time, peace out. Oh, I almost forgot to say, it's competition time in a couple of weeks, so stay tuned to the airwaves to find out the details of what you can win and how to enter.